Hey, yo, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. This is Smart TCG, and today I'm going to be going over my updated tier list heading into San Antonio Regional Championships. San Antonio Regional Championships is expected to be one of the biggest Pokemon TCG tournaments of the year, and today I'm going to be going over where I think the current metagame stands. So, that being said, if you enjoy the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments. Feel free to leave it down there, and yeah, let's hop right into it. So, hopping into it here, we got a lot of different decks, very wide open format right now. After the most recent Birmingham Regional Championships this previous week, it kind of shook some things up. So we have some decks that have made their way back on the tier list. Things like Palkia and Terapagos as well has been seeing some success again. So let's hop into some of the decks that surprised a lot of people this previous weekend. So hopping into it here, I'm going to start off with Palk Noctowl. Palk Noctowl stormed back into the standard format with multiple making top 8 at Birmingham, and I think it's a relatively solid deck right now. I'm not going to put it in tier A, although there were 3 in top 8 just because I think the metagame is going to adjust to this. So yeah, Palk Noctowl, pretty powerful deck, has decent matchups against things like Gardevoir and Regidrago. However, gets really held back by that Charizard matchup. That Charizard matchup is not very good. If the Charizard player is able to get set up, you can run into a lot of problems. So you have to be careful. This is a really powerful deck. However, that Zard matchup is definitely an issue, which is why I have not chose to put it in A, as I do expect Charizard to see quite a bit of play this weekend after Charizard most recently won the Birmingham Regional Championships, which means I'm going to put it up here in tier A. Charizard is a deck that has a Regidrago problem. Its Regidrago matchup is not very good. However, it does really well against the decks that are trying to beat Regidrago. For example, those turbo decks, you got things like Raging Bolt, Roaring Moon, Miraidon, decks like Palkia and Noctowl. Those decks are oftentimes focused on taking down that Regidrago matchup, which means if you run into those decks as Charizard, yeah, you might not beat, the Regidrago matchup very consistently, but you'll beat the decks that are trying to beat it, which is, really nice. So Zard's still pretty powerful. I definitely think makes a good play heading into this tournament. If you do dodge the Regidragos, I think it'd be honestly a tier S deck if Regidrago didn't exist. But yeah, still very, very powerful deck. You do pretty well against the majority of the format. You just kind of have that issue versus Drago. Next up here, we got Lugia. Lugia, still a pretty powerful deck. I think is the sleeper pick heading into this tournament. You do pretty okay versus the majority of decks. Your Drago matchup is favorite. That's one of the biggest things going for you. Even if they play Temple, I feel like Lugia, if they do get turn 2 double Archeops, is still looking pretty good into that matchup. You do okay versus Charizard. Your Gardevoir matchup is close as well. And you kind of have the ability to beat anything if you get going. If you are able to get that turn 2 double Archeops, you're just chilling. You're off to the races. But this deck's biggest issue is itself just sometimes does not set up. Sometimes you draw into those hands with 5 or 6 energies, or you don't get Summoning Star until turn 4. So those are the things that are kind of holding it back. But it does have pretty good matchups. It has pretty good matchups, and I think there's a good chance someone runs hot with it, and they see a lot of success at the tournament. So yeah, it's good. Definitely expected to show up. But get some Lugia hands, they might say, as some of your draws aren't very good. Next up here, we have Archlodon. Archlodon, still pretty powerful deck, did pretty well at most recent Birmingham. I'm not going to put it in tier A right now. I'm going to put it in tier B just because its matchup against Charizard is relatively rough, and Charizard is expected to be a big player heading into this weekend, but it does do pretty decently against decks like Regidrago. Your Gardevoir matchup is close as well. Having access to things like the Dialga, really gives this deck a lot of depth that I feel like it needs right now. I think that the regular, just, straight 4/4 variant with not a whole lot of really other attackers can sometimes fall into the being too linear problem. So I have been actually really enjoying the Dialga recently. Gives yourself some extra plays against, some tougher matchups like Charizard, for example. So yeah, still a pretty powerful deck. Having a decent Regidrago matchup is great. However, you have a Charizard problem for sure. So anyways, next up here, we're going to go over, some of the, more rogue decks. We have Goldango, put in tier C, still a powerful deck. Honestly, none of these decks are bad. I'm going to make that, very clear. None of these decks are bad. However, I do think there are some decks that are slightly stronger than it. So if I put a deck in, tier C or tier D, I'm actually not going to put any of these in tier D, as I think they all have, potential. But yeah, I think Goldango just a little bit too linear right now. Doesn't have a powerful one prize attacker that so many of these other decks have. So I think that's one of the things that holds it back. But yeah, overall, I think Goldango is just okay. Nothing really special right now. Still has some potential. Wouldn't be surprised if some do well. Cerulege as well did show up at Birmingham. I believe there was one in top 32. Kind of similar to Goldengo, kind of runs into the linearity problem. However, your matchup against Regidrago is actually not that bad. But you can run into some problems against, decks like Charizard, for example. Your Gardevoir matchup as well, not great. So you can sometimes run into problems against those decks. Next, we got Miraidon as well. Kind of falls into that same issue, just another turbo deck. Has access to Iron Hands, but with Charizard, especially seeing more play recently, that's not good for the deck because that was the deck that was, kind of holding it back. And after Charizard just most recently won, Miraidon isn't necessarily in the best spot. Next up here, we got Turtle. We got Terapagos here. I think Terapagos is pretty powerful right now. Multiple made day 2. We saw Daniel Powell get top 8. With Terapagos Bouffalant. We saw Tord get top 16 as well with the really cool Regidrago V-Star variant. So has some pretty cool variants right now. I think it makes a decent play overall. You kind of have a chance versus everything. You kind of 50-50 a lot of the top decks. If you do play Buffalo, you are like close into Zard, and your matchup against Regidrago is already kind of 50-50. Your Gardevoir matchup is like 55-45 at best. It's very close. If you are able to win the coin flip and go first, you can just kind of run them off the board. But it can get quite close. But you have, pretty good matchups against things, like Lugia. Your turbo matchups are pretty good. Your cloth matchup is pretty solid as well. So you have a chance versus a lot of things and some pretty good matchups across the board. You don't have a whole lot of glaring weaknesses. You don't do necessarily anything exceptionally well, but you do like pretty much everything, kind of, I would say, solidly. So that's important. All right, next up here, we got Raging Bolt. Bolt's B tier deck, solid deck overall, but I think the 3 decks above it are better. Pretty good turbo deck right now, has a decent Regidrago matchup, but has problems against Charizard and Gardevoir. Also Terapagos, if Terapagos comes back, is not a good matchup. So that's another problem for you as well. Next up here, we got Turbo Roaring Moon. Turbo Roaring Moon has been seeing some play. There have been multiple in day 2 at Birmingham. That's also just like some previous tournaments as well. Has been doing okay. It's not my preferred turbo deck at the moment, just because I think that Bolt has a better chance against Charizard and also Regidrago, whereas Turbo Roaring Moon can sometimes run into problems against those decks just because Regidrago can, double cure him. The Turbo Roaring Moon, unless you, really limit your board, which requires you to draw pretty well. And your Zard matchup isn't necessarily great too, as if you want to take big knockouts on Charizard, you have to Frenzied Gouging, which sets up some unfortunate Dusknoir Briar plays. So yeah, you have to be pretty careful. I do think the deck is pretty solid overall. I think actually both these turbo decks are actually pretty decently positioned. They're fast, consistent, being able to take advantage of decks that aren't able to necessarily set up super well against you. So you have that going for you. Next up here, we have Gardevoir. Gardevoir, in my opinion, is a tier A deck right below Charizard, I think, at the moment. You take 50-50s against a lot of decks in the format. Your Drago matchup is close. Your Charizard matchup is iffy, but you do pretty well against the majority of other things. The Palk matchup can be kind of scary if they get turn 2 canceling Cologne, Radiant Greninja, which is kind of annoying. And with Terapagos coming back, I don't think you're necessarily favored into that. So that's why I have it currently under Charizard at the moment. Next up here, we got Snorlax Stall. I will also mention Pidgeot Control as well. I think they're B tier decks. They're not bad. They're definitely okay right now. Both those decks have a chance to see success. Both can take advantage of players who don't necessarily know how to play against the deck, which is, good. Yeah, I think they're both, pretty decent decks. Next up, we got Cloth. Cloth still solid deck overall. Going to put it in tier B. Definitely respect this deck. I think it has quite a bit of potential. You do really well against the turbo decks. You do pretty decently into Regidrago as well. But unfortunately, you have a big Charizard problem and you have a big Gardevoir problem. You also have a big Archaludon problem as well, because they can just heal you out of games. But taking a good, I just feel like taking good matchups against the turbo decks and taking a decent Regidrago matchup is definitely pretty good. So you do have some things going for the deck. Next up, we got Ancient Box. A little bit too slow and consistent at times. Has a bad Zard matchup. Iffy Gardevoir matchup. Iffy Drago matchup. C tier deck at the moment, but still solid. Got Dragapult Dusknoir. I think just worse Charizard at the moment. Also much more inconsistent at times than Charizard. Doesn't hit turn 2 attack as consistently as you would like. So have that in tier C. Next up, we got Dragapult Iron Thorns. I think this is the better Dragapult variant. Definitely expect this deck to see some success. Just Iron Thorns very good. Being able to slow down decks is quite nice with the Iron Thorns. Then going into Dragapult, it's pretty simple strategy. Easy to set up. I think it's pretty good. Last up, we got Regidrago. I'm not going to put it in tier S, actually. Some people might have expected me to save it for tier S. I think it's a tier A deck. I think that, especially with like Palkia coming back to try and check the deck, Lugia is expecting to see more play as well. I think the deck is not far and away the best deck. It's still the best deck though, I think, right now. So I think, a couple of weeks ago, just where the metagame was looking, Drago wasn't being as contested as I think a lot of people might have liked it to be. However, most recently we saw that rise of the Palkia and Noctowl deck again. So decks are starting to, show up that do pretty well against Regidrago. People are coming a little bit more prepared. So at the moment, in my opinion, still the strongest deck, but not necessarily by a super big margin. So anyways, that is going to be my tier list. Let me know what you think of it in the comments. But that is going to do it for today. I will be attending San Antonio along with plenty of the other Team DDG members. So if you see them, make sure to say hi if you want. But anyways, thanks for all the support as always on the channel. We appreciate it so much. Thanks so much. And I will speak with you guys again soon. This is Smart TCG from Team DDG. Peace out.